What do you think, Father Jacob-Bertrand, what do you think the novel has to say about community? Because you've referred to a few of the characters that the Count meets and the ways that he finds community.
Yeah, I think in transitioning to this next point, it's still something that I wanted, or a word that I wanted to use that I didn't yet, but I will, and it moves off also to like the community dynamic is this idea of tradition, sticking to these traditions, right? And we've talked about it. We don't need to reiterate, but I like thinking about the two kind of juxtaposed realities of tradition and then being like, I'll say this. I think that tradition frees us from what you cautioned against. Tradition frees us from being dominated by our circumstances, right? Because like tradition and participating things that are within tradition or custom, and that sort of mindset, we're entering into something that's bigger than us.
Right.
I hear this is kind of silly, but maybe it's not silly, but I think here of like Downton Abbey, for example, like why is it so important that these houses be maintained and these customs and these, well, because they give life to something that is bigger than any one family that's living in the house at one time. We can think of too in our faith, like the chair of St. Peter, like the Holy Father and the position of the Holy Father in the church is bigger than any one man. Kind of thing. And it's the tradition surrounding that. It invites us to participate and unify us in something that's bigger and that we don't create for ourselves, but we become formed by. And so too in these traditions that he's keeping up, like the Count doesn't create these, but he's been formed by them. And so have so many other people around him. So when those are lost, you almost begin to lose a sense of identity, which is kind of ironic in ways because it's an identity that he's not created for himself, but one in which he participates. And I think highlights the reality of who we are as human beings and our reality to especially to live with and under God. Is that the fullness of who we are as men and women is actuated by our participation, not by our sort of self-determining creation. And you see that stifling, that beige whatever kind of take over when everybody is like, no, this is what I do. This is what I do. I'm creating my own world. And it's like, well, your world is boring and it's like predictable and blah, so all this. And this comes to bear too in the relationships, right? That maintain a sense of tradition throughout, because most of everyone who the Count is now interacting with is staff who he would have interacted with, but in very limited ways before. But you see his interactions with like the seamstress and the mailman and like the front desk concierge and these sort of people. You see the relationship grow from one of like servant class to like upper class to an actual relationship as like one, as these traditions are maintained, like as these customs of living are maintained, but also as like the circumstances of life are formed such that he needs to begin to rely on these people and they begin to rely on him in different ways. So these relationships are, they develop throughout very quickly, but in ways that are genuine too.
Yeah. I like this point a lot that you're making here, where you're arguing that tradition is what allows the relationships to be more than transactional.
Yeah.
And the Marxist proletariat, the Bolsheviks, they can only consider every relationship as transactional. But if you have a grounding in tradition, you can see a kind of richness and discover meaning in these relationships that's very profound. In the novel, he says, this is such a great quote about tradition. In the novel, Count Rostov says, "The principle here is that a new generation owes a measure of thanks to every member of the previous generation. Our elders planted fields and fought in wars. They advanced the arts and sciences and generally made sacrifices on our behalf. So by their efforts, however humble, they have earned a measure of our gratitude and respect."
Father Jacob-Bertrand, would you say that you're optimistic about this subscription appeal?
No.
Would you say that you're optimistic about anything?
No.
Well, I am. Folks, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'd greatly appreciate it. Cheers.